out of the car! Get out of the car now! Turn around. You're under arrest. Stop moving. Stop resisting.
On March 21st, 2022, Washington State resident 38-year-old Nicole McClure ended her Walmart night stalking shift early. With her head throbbing and her eyelids fatigued, all Nicole could really think about was crawling into her nice warm bed back at home. Except unbeknownst to Nicole, she wouldn't be making it home to her bed that night. Little did she know that on this night, fate had other plans. It was about 2:48 a.m., not too far from that Walmart near Olympia, that Nicole's vehicle was spotted by Washington State Patrol Trooper Jonathan Barnes, who noticed that the vehicle was creeping along at a very low rate of speed, while at the same time, the driver was swerving in and out of their lane. Barnes put on his flashing lights and pulled up closely behind the vehicle, driven by Nicole McClure. Except she didn't pull over right away. Instead, she continued driving, and at a speed of about 25 miles per hour in a 40-mile-per-hour zone, she collided with a roundabout on 22nd Avenue and Boulevard Road. Despite the impact happening at such a low rate of speed, the damage to the car was significant, and Nicole's vehicle rolled to a stop alongside a curb near Karen Fraser Road. What happens next is immortalized in the Dashcam video that you're about to see. If you aren't familiar with this story, I urge you to pay special attention because there just might be a lot more going on here than at first meets the eye. I'll be back to fill in all the gaps as soon as this is over, so without any further ado, here's our footage. Check it out.
Get out of the car! Get out of the car now! Get out of the car! Hands where I can see you! Turn around. You're under arrest. Turn around. You're under arrest. Don't you lose. Turn around. Stop resisting. Yeah, you were. Stop moving. I don't care what you need right now. Turn around. Drop that there. Get against the car. Go. Nice, there's going to be one female in custody. No use of force. Stop resisting. Stop resisting. Right, one female, white female. I have her in custody.
931 female in custody, no use of force, resume over traffic 258.
I wasn't eluding.
You're under arrest, ma'am, for felony eluding.
I wasn't eluding.
What the hell are you trying to do?
I wasn't eluding.
Stop resisting! Hey, John. No, she keeps trying to use these keys like stab.
No, I just...
Ma'am, I wasn't trying to use the keys as a weapon.
No, I'm not.
Then just let go of them, ma'am.
Let me put them in my pocket.
No. Just let go of the keys. She's trying to use them as a weapon. Let go of your keys.
I'm not.
Then let go of them. Okay.
I wasn't eluding.
All right, ma'am, we're already over that. Do you have any reason to poke stick or hurt me?
No.
Good.
I wasn't eluding.
Do you have a license on you, ma'am?
Yes.
Where's it at?
In my back pocket.
All right, appreciate it. Don't go for it. I'm done with you reaching around. Why don't you stop?
I didn't know I was being pulled over.
Okay, my license siren didn't give you a clue on Yelp Highway, ma'am?
No.
No, you just wanted to keep driving at lower speed? You wanted to hit a bunch of barriers and stuff?
No, I'm not feeling real well.
Yeah? Not at all?
No, that's
Why's
why
that?
I left work.
Not at all. All right, fantastic. One moment. You're under arrest.
I wasn't eluding.
All right, ma'am. It's time for you to be quiet, okay?
Please don't
So,
talk
you have the right to remain silent. It's the right time to attorney. Any state can be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to your attorney before answering questions. You have the right to have an attorney present during the questioning.
Please
You
don't
cannot afford
arrest
attorney
me.
when we point about cause of desire. You can exercise the right to any time. You understand these rights, ma'am?
Please don't arrest me.
Is that a yes or no?
Yes.
Fantastic. So why wouldn't I not arrest you at this point?
Because I wasn't eluding.
Okay.
Charles 5893.
How much alcohol have you had tonight?
I haven't had any.
When's the last time you had any? Roughly. Like
12 hours ago.
12 hours ago? Okay. One moment.
I wasn't eluding.
Are these yours? Yeah, she was fighting with me to keep them in her hands with their teeth.
Uncuff me.
No.
Please,
We're way
I wasn't
past that.
eluding you. I pulled over.
Ma'am, was last time you used meth?
I haven't used any meth.
When? Was last time you used meth?
I haven't.
Not at all?
No.
What about heroin?
No.
No? Okay, so why'd you leave work?
Because I was feeling dizzy.
Why were you feeling dizzy?
I think I'm really tired.
So being really tired makes you dizzy and then you start hitting barriers and stuff?
I was confused
About what?
where I was.
Why are you confused where you were?
Because I think I'm tired.
So, how much sleep did you get last night, ma'am?
Like 6 hours.
You got 6 hours of sleep and you're that tired? You're not sure where you're at, what you're doing? Is that what you're telling me? Yeah? Okay. Why is that?
Just let me go, please.
What kind of medication are you taking, ma'am?
I'm not taking any.
Not at all. Any antidepressants, pain medications, anti-anxiety, bipolar medications?
No.
Lithium? Nothing? None at all.
Just uncuff me.
All right, ma'am. At this time, you're also under arrest for DUI.
For what?
You're under arrest for DUI and felony eluding.
For what?
9-0. Yeah, she'll be in custody for DUI and felony eluding.
It's not under the influence.
All right, ma'am. Everything you're telling me is you're under the influence, okay?
No, I'm just really tired.
Okay. I'm glad you're really tired. Yeah. Get a bag on.
I just want to go home and go to bed.
Well, that's going to be a long night now, ma'am.
Please just let me go.
No, we're way past that.
Please just let me go.
All right. If you can turn towards my camera right here, ma'am. Like I said, everything's being audio recorded, okay?
Please just let me go.
Man, we're way past that stage. If you would stop for me on Young Highway when I activated my lights, and if you were cool, I probably would have been home. Way too late for that.
Okay, so before we begin, and I've watched this I don't know how many times, but there's the part at the beginning that I don't feel like I really want to just skirt over. It's not what's at the crux of this incident, but I do just in the very least want to satisfy my own personal curiosity regarding the matter. And what I'm referring to is the whole approach of the stopped car. All guns ablaze, almost literally. I mean, look at the bravado on this guy. This man, State Trooper Jonathan Barnes, is so worked up, I'm surprised we don't see pit stains. Within the first second of the scene, we see as Barnes approaches Nicole's vehicle with his gun drawn, kicking and yelling and screaming, and probably as soon as he realizes it's not John Gotti sitting in the front seat, this guy, Trooper Barnes, just pretty quickly, albeit clumsily, hurries to put the thing away. Then shortly after that, you're going to hear him radio in something along the lines of he's got a white female in custody, and then he adds that there was no use of force.
One female in custody, no use of force. Stop resisting! Stop resisting!
I wasn't.
Right, one female, white female. I have her in custody.
9-3, 1 female in custody, no use of force, resume over traffic 258.
I wasn't eluding.
That's all I really wanted to get out of the way. I'm partially personally curious. Should there be anyone out there in law enforcement or that knows about law enforcement or even law pertaining to a person's civil rights, I guess, if you feel like weighing in on this issue by any chance, from what I've personally come to understand, during an arrest, drawing a firearm on someone, that's whether you discharge said weapon or not, is considered quote-unquote use of force. Questions I've got left after that are simply, 1. Was this particular use of force justified? According to Dawkins versus Graham, the factors laid out for consideration as to whether it's justified include, quote, the severity of the crime at issue, whether the subject poses an immediate threat to the safety of officers or others, and whether he or she is actively resisting arrest or attempting to evade arrest by flight, end quote. And actually, I'm curious to know what everyone thinks about that, especially after seeing that whole video. Is Barnes playing up this whole felony evasion charge, or do you feel like the criteria was met in this particular case? And then second, here pretty clear when Trooper Barnes states, white woman in custody, no use of force. And this next part is more of a question I'd have for anyone more knowledgeable about this kind of thing. I've just kind of been taught that if a cop pulls a gun out, he's got to report it, whether he uses it or not. This could be misinformed. It could maybe vary depending on the state or jurisdiction, but I'm just curious as to whether anyone wants to weigh in on that aspect as well. By the end of this video, we've already caught Trooper Barnes, in my humble opinion, making at least about half a dozen mistakes, and I'm just trying to overlook as few as possible here. But it is on that note that I do want to go ahead and just get this thing started. So how about let's just go ahead and get to talking about what went down during the traffic stop of Nicole McClure just maybe a couple hours past midnight on this fateful night in spring of 22. One thing that I don't think anybody disputes is that Nicole's mental state at the time of the stop is indeed questionable. She's not all quite there, it seems, but we don't really know why this is. Trooper Barnes comes in assuming that the driver has had a bit too much to drink. The problem is that even after he's had a chance to observe Nicole's depreciated cognitive state, without even a breathalyzer to back him up, Barnes still refuses to entertain any other possibilities besides his initial assumption. This turns out to be detrimental in the end, because Trooper Barnes doesn't ask her if she needs medical help, and when she gives him really obvious clues that she probably does need to be at the very least evaluated, he ignores that, or rather he chalks it up to her being under the influence. This mistake on Barnes's part is what ends up being at the crux of this whole story. Put yourself in the shoes of someone like Trooper Barnes. If or when there's a person involved in an accident who expressly mentions to you that they don't feel very well, that they haven't been feeling very well, in fact, that they've been feeling dizzy, that they've been confused, and on top of that, they seem to be confused as they're relaying all this to you, even if being attentive to that isn't in the state trooper handbook of what to do in this kind of situation, I honestly don't know, it still seems like a normal human reaction to have. In the video, we hear it as Nicole straight up tells him she was confused about where she was. That's not normal to not know where you are, even if you have had a few to drink. And so while that conversation should have been a clue to the trooper, instead, Trooper Barnes belittles her in that derogatory, nasally, whiny voice he has.
Okay, my lights and sirens didn't give you a clue on Yelp Highway, ma'am? No. No, you just wanted to keep driving at lower speed? You wanted to hit a bunch of barriers and stuff?
Another big problem we have is the question of what Trooper Barnes was basing his conclusion that the suspect was definitely driving under the influence off of. As I already said, I understand Barnes' initial suspicion. In all fairness, say you've just watched as this person you've been trying to pull over for swerving. Instead of pulling over, they go careening into a roundabout. Sure, I can understand why initially it makes sense to suspect that alcohol might have something to do with that. But as a cop, I would think his job after that is to gather evidence. And if the evidence you gather is not in support of what you personally assumed was up in the beginning, you have to scrap that assumption and move on to alternative possibilities. I don't know if this arrest is cutting into the big guy's lunch hour or what, but Trooper Barnes does none of that. According to Barnes himself, he ends up taking Nicole in for DUI with his sole probable cause being that her eyes appeared bloodshot and that she was repeating herself while he was trying to arrest her. After this, Barnes throws her into a squad car. At no point do we see them give her a breathalyzer, and at no point do we see them conduct a field sobriety test. On the way to the station, it said that Barnes makes a stop at the hospital so that Nicole could have her blood drawn. This, of course, is so that Trooper Barnes can have his proof that Nicole has some kind of substance in her system, and hence show that he was justified in arresting her. And yet, check this out. Even now, Barnes still doesn't mention to the medical staff at the hospital that this woman has just been involved in a car accident. All in all, it's as if it doesn't even cross his mind to make sure that this lady is okay. Instead of checking her into the medical facility to get evaluated, as he should have done, Barnes takes her in for booking at the Thurston County Jail, where guards continue to assume Nicole is under the influence, and according to what she remembers of the horrifying experience, which goes on to last longer than a whole day, they take to mocking her pretty badly too. But first, if anyone is curious to know the results of Nicole McClure's blood test, I'm not going to keep you in suspense any longer. As far as alcohol and drugs are concerned, the results would only corroborate exactly what she'd been trying to tell Trooper Hothead the whole time, and that is that there had been 0 drugs or alcohol in her system. In that video we all just saw, Nicole McClure was 100% sober. Now, did Trooper Barnes know all this at the time? Or in other words, how fast did it take for the blood test results to come back in? I've read some articles that say the results were in by the following day, and a couple of other articles have insinuated that Barnes knew the results of the test before even leaving the medical facility, but ultimately we don't know. Although from everything I've read, I'm nearly 100% inclined to believe that for strictly a blood test, in all likelihood he didn't know the results on that night or even the day after. Again, this is just my conclusion based on the things I came across and the things I personally read. From what I've found online, it seems like it's standard for it to take the results of such tests at least 1 month to come back to anyone. Yet, unfortunately, for the time being, this is still what Officer Barnes thinks, and it's also what jailers at Thurston County Jail think. Just so you know, there's no footage from the jail being given to the public that I'm aware of, but according to Nicole's very own account of what happened, the entire jail staff pretty much took it for granted that she was drunk, and they were pretty mean about it too. All in all, it was approximately 27 hours following her initial encounter with Barnes that she was kept in that cell, during which time her condition just worsened and worsened. Wrongfully assuming she was drunk, instead of helping her, staff made fun of her. Nicole vaguely remembers struggling for half an hour to put on the jail pants they'd given her, one leg at a time. That's how confused she was just only upon arrival. At one point, one of the officers there looked over and tastelessly asked her if she needed another shot. Nicole would spend the next 24 hours languishing in that cell, her symptoms getting worse and worse. At one point, it's said that she began to vomit violently. Not surprisingly, no one helped her, and no one sought to have her condition looked into by a medical professional. The next day, she was found in her cell lying in her own urine. A couple of officials finally helped lift her up onto a cot, seeing as she had lost the ability to walk and stand on her own by that point. But they stopped there, opting to throw a pair of clean pants in her direction, perhaps in the hope that they would miraculously be able to put themselves on. What gets me is how after a day in the slammer, even a normal person should have known at that point that Nicole wasn't drunk, and most likely not on anything else either. A person doesn't stay drunk for 24 hours, and they definitely don't get worse when they're not drinking or having more to drink. And yet it seems like for a very long time this didn't occur to one single person employed at that jail. You really have to wonder who they're hiring to work these jobs when it hits you that not one person there was able to put two and two together and realize that, wait a minute, this chick was booked on DUI charges 18 hours ago and yet she still hasn't sobered up? Gee, maybe it wouldn't hurt to make a quick call to get a medic down in here. It wasn't until 27 hours after she'd first been observed crashing her car by State Trooper Jonathan Barnes that someone from the medical staff came in. And so, 27 plus critical hours later, now finally finding herself at the hospital, they run a few scans and they discover that Nicole McClure had been telling the truth after all. She had no drugs in her system, and yet still something was pretty obviously wrong. And that's because what she did have was a brain bleed. Formerly called a prefrontal subdural hematoma, Nicole's condition was beyond dire at that point. They had to operate on her pretty much immediately, at which time they removed a portion of her skull so as to alleviate the pressure and remove the massive wad of blood that had been collecting itself inside her skull this whole entire time, if not considerably longer. Ms. McClure remained in the hospital for 17 days after that, and after her ordeal was over, well, you might say that that's when she realized that her ordeal was actually, in fact, far, far from over. Fast forward to the year 2024, February 1st to be exact, and at this point, Nicole, now at age 40, at what should be the prime of her life, some might say, formally files a lawsuit against the Washington State Troopers, as well as Thurston County Jail, which claims that Ms. McClure's civil rights were violated, and that's for obvious reasons, I would say.
Get out of the car! Get out of the car now!
A gun shoved in her face,
Get out of the car!
forcefully cuffed,
Felony alert! Turn around! Stop resisting!
arrested on the hood of her car.
Stop resisting!
These are the moments Nicole McClure's attorney says troopers should have used to get her client desperately needed help. Instead, McClure sat in a jail cell for more than a day, throwing up and going to the bathroom on herself, getting made fun of by jail staff, accused of being drunk. But her attorney tells me she wasn't drunk. When McClure finally got treatment, doctors determined she had a brain bleed. Part of her skull was removed during surgery, and she was hospitalized for more than 2 weeks.
From what I've learned, the suit is 100% warranted. Nicole has been left with permanent brain damage, which some experts say was the result of all the time that passed before being allowed to have a medical examination performed. This damage is, to this day, noticeable and relatively extensive. For one, she now relies on others to do even the most basic of things. To one interviewer, she even confessed that she no longer likes to leave the house much due to fear. She explains how a lot of times she gets so confused that she doesn't even know where she is or how she got there, and naturally you can imagine that's a pretty scary thing. Perhaps not surprisingly, she's no longer able to drive or work. Even the interviewer remarked having noticed that on occasion when she speaks, she has difficulty articulating her thoughts.
Nearly 2 years later, McClure suffers from brain damage and can't take care of herself.
it hits you. This is a person whose life is never going to be the same, and she's never going to be the same.
The suit says no one conducted a DUI test or gave McClure a breathalyzer.
This was really a systemic failure for Nicole.
Barnes has been a trooper since June of 2019.
Nicole's lawyer has emphasized the point that due to Trooper Barnes' actions on that night and due to the actions of the jail officials, Nicole's life is now forever changed. But considering the pending lawsuit, I thought that rather than take the statement for granted, I would look into things a bit for myself. What I wanted to know is, did the time Nicole McClure spent in jail really have such a strong hand in the extent of how bad Nicole's brain damage remains today? Well, to start with, just from an observational point of view, we can already see how, yes, the passage of time did mean more damage to Nicole's brain. Consider that when she arrived at the jail, she was pretty confused, but she was at least standing on her own 2 feet, she was verbal, and so forth. About 24 hours later, she was urinating on herself and not able to stand up. So evidently something was getting worse in there. Now, a quick interjection to say, I've seen a handful of news articles report that what Nicole suffered from was a stroke. They essentially take to using the term stroke and brain bleed interchangeably. The fact is, what Nicole had was not the same as a stroke nor as an aneurysm. The technical medical term for Nicole's condition is prefrontal subdural hematoma. Originally, I had planned to go into depth about what this means and all that, but in the end, it ended up being a rather lengthy lecture, and so if you are interested in learning more, absolutely feel free to look it up. Now, it's said that a subdural hematoma usually occurs as the result of a major head injury, but it can also be the result of a minor head injury or in some cases no head injury. I haven't found any place that specifies the causes of Nicole's brain injury, but ultimately it doesn't matter so much what caused it as does the fact that she had it. According to MountSinai.org, some of the more common symptoms of subdural hematoma are confused or slurred speech, problems with balance or walking, headache, lack of energy or confusion, seizures or loss of consciousness, nausea and vomiting, weakness and numbness, vision problems and or behavioral changes or psychosis. Note how a vast majority of these symptoms were already presenting themselves by the time of Nicole's run-in with Trooper Barnes. That gives us a really vague idea of what kind of a timeline Nicole may have been working with. And on that note, MountSinai.org stresses a couple of things. For one, it states that acute subdural hematomas are among the deadliest of all head injuries. And secondly, the site states that a person suspected to have such a condition needs to not delay in seeking help right away. The same site clearly states that, quote, outlook depends on the type and location of the head injury, the size of the blood collection, and how soon treatment is started, end quote. Given this fact alone, it's rather astonishing that Trooper Barnes wasn't punished for the part his hasty and ignorant decision-making process played in destroying a woman's entire life. I get how someone might be thinking, okay, that's great, but wait a minute, cops aren't trained in medicine. Trooper Barnes was no medical professional, so what was supposed to clue Barnes in on the fact that this was the result of brain damage and not the result of intoxication? What if in general, like Barnes, you're not trained to tell when someone you're pulling over is drunk or else they've had some kind of hematoma? Well, these actually aren't bad questions, and I'm actually happy to answer all of that. But first, to assist me just a bit with that, please do have a look at this short clip. This is footage of a totally different traffic stop conducted in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, around relatively the same time that Nicole's arrest occurred. Have a look, though, and see what other similarities and differences you might be able to spot.
In South Carolina, near Charleston, the same year of McClure's incident, Mount Pleasant police dealt with almost the exact circumstances. But these officers did not cuff this driver and throw her in jail.
I think something medical's going on with you and you really need to go to the hospital and get checked out.
According to the department's Facebook, the woman thanked the officers later for saving her life, helping her to get surgery to remove a brain tumor.
I think we just sent her in the ambulance. Ma'am, we're going to have you go with the ambulance.
So in this second story, we basically saw proof that these kinds of cases don't need to end up in lawsuits against the state troopers, against the county jail. These cases don't need to end up in permanent brain damage. And unless I'm mistaken, these were police officers. These weren't doctors or even EMTs. They were police officers that were doing their job and that were paying attention. To tie this back into our discussion about Barnes, that's really the only difference here. I'm not going to speculate as to what Trooper Barnes' mental issues might be. I'm obviously not in a position where I could properly do that, but I'm not going to lie that from what I just saw in the video where Barnes arrests Nicole McClure, I do think it wouldn't hurt to maybe go talk to a professional. To me, just as a human being, to think that people like Barnes are out there walking around with the power to arrest us or decide what happens to our future scares the crap out of me. The fact that someone as uncool as Jonathan Barnes gets to decide whether they think I'm being cool or not, I'm going to agree with Nicole's lawyer, a huge systemic failure. This guy has been given the power to decide to arrest us, and that's apparently at his own discretion. If he feels like it, he can pull a gun out on us. We could be having a brain bleed, it doesn't matter. Last I heard, Barnes did not receive any sort of punishment or reprimand for his actions. But nope, like I last heard, Barnes is still out there. Every day he goes out to work, he still arrests people, he still pulls them over, he still gives them any kind of citation he wants to as far as anyone has been informed. So yeah, it's scary. The officers involved in the clip of the second stop we've just watched, I don't know if they have any more medical training than our friend Barnes did over here. Kind of doubt it, but these officers seem to have a higher capacity than Trooper Barnes has. These officers were able to stop and take a moment to assess the whole situation and realize that, wait a minute, maybe this isn't a case of intoxication after all. Something clued them in on the possibility that the suspect's erratic driving could be the result of a neurological condition, and that compelled them to have her taken in for medical evaluation immediately. Going back to Trooper Barnes just one last time, like I've said in so many ways, my problem isn't with Barnes' initial assumption. My problem is with the way that Barnes handles things after he's given what should be additional contradictory evidence to work with. Not being more observant at the scene, not asking more questions, and not listening to the suspect when she's attempting to explain herself is the problem I have with Barnes. It's almost literally painful to watch how badly this guy just doesn't give a shit. He asks Nicole a question, but then he doesn't want to hear the answer.
Service with humility. It's the motto for Washington State Patrol. The department says its troopers are the most visible part of the agency and provide the best public safety services to the people of Washington.
I don't care what you need right now.
Interestingly, a little look into Trooper Barnes' history with the department reveals that he's been on the force since 2019. And what's most funny to note is that upon graduation, Barnes received a Core Values Award, which is given to candidates who have been deemed to possess a high degree of accountability and integrity and who, according to the State Patrol website, are dedicated to, quote, respecting and protecting individual rights and earning the trust and confidence of the public, end quote.
This award is presented to the Trooper Cadet who most exemplifies the Washington State Patrol's core values, which include strong leadership, effective partnerships, professional excellence, acting with integrity and accountability, respecting and protecting individual rights, and promoting a culture of continuous improvement. This year, the Core Values Award for the 111th Trooper Basic Training Class is awarded to Trooper Cadet Jonathan Barnes.
And of course, if you caught even a fraction of what just went down on the Dashcam, it'd be terribly hard to miss the irony of him being given that award. Putting aside the whole way it begins, pretty early on there's a point where Nicole denies having been drinking. She even tries to explain how she just got off work because she wasn't feeling well and because she suspects that she's just really tired. Except that in response, the state trooper decides, I guess, to start throwing darts at the Encyclopedia of Illicit Substances. Because one of his next inquiries is, okay, well, when was the last time you used any meth? Not have you done any meth, but when was the last time you used meth? Perhaps wording it like that was in hopes of tricking her, or maybe he just wants to make sure everyone within earshot knows how big a jerk he is. Either way, when she denies the usage of any meth, he starts asking her the same question about heroin, as if all three of those substances, that is, alcohol, meth, and heroin, would have the same effect on a person, and that would be the effect that he's observing here in Nicole. If I had to guess, I might guess he's probably just that ignorant, because in not very long from now, he's going to add lithium to this list of random psychopharmaceuticals. Lithium. Why lithium? Why in the world would this man randomly suspect lithium? There's just nothing about this trooper's sense of reasoning that makes any sense to me at all. But believe it or not, there's an even more cringy exchange, which I'm actually going to play again for you real quick.
So why'd you leave work?
Because I was feeling dizzy.
Why were you feeling dizzy?
I think I'm really tired.
So being really tired makes you dizzy and then you start hitting barriers and stuff?
Actually, yes, Trooper Barnes. If a person is experiencing extreme fatigue and they decide to operate a motor vehicle, then yes, absolutely, they might get dizzy and crash into barriers. When a driver is sleep deprived, absolutely the driver might fall asleep. Absolutely the results can be deadly. This happens all the time. How does Trooper Barnes not know this? Another pretty big issue looking at this case, once again goes back a little, and basically it's to do with this little sheet of paper you should be seeing pictured on your screen right about now. It may be hard to read, but basically what this is a whole entire section of questions that Trooper Jonathan Barnes was supposed to ask Nicole McClure, but which he didn't. These questions are almost all related to medical history, and the rest consist of questions to be asked when a vehicular collision has occurred. After reading through these questions, in my opinion, there's a pretty high likelihood that had the trooper asked these questions rather than crossing out the section and writing the words "did not ask" across the page, the true urgent nature of her condition may have revealed itself a little better. At face value, it may have seemed like a good thing that Nicole crashed into that roundabout and that she was able to get the attention of people that way. I say this because when it comes to a brain hemorrhage or prefrontal subdural hematoma, going home and falling asleep the way it seemed she'd so desperately wanted to do could have proven itself to be fatal. Many people don't ever again wake up from that. So alerting someone to a problem was not in itself a terrible thing. The problem seems to be with who happened to be alerted. Comparing Nicole's encounter with Barnes to the one the woman had with the officers in Mount Pleasant, you have to ask yourself really, what more could she have done to help herself at all? If from the very first moment he starts to mock her every attempt to interject even 2 words, from the moment he lays eyes on her car, sadly Nicole's fate is sealed. It sounds as if Nicole herself didn't know about her own condition evidently, and she'd only just at work begun to notice her symptoms to the best of what I know. It said that she was first made aware of the situation when she reports her hands began sweating, her toes were tingling. She began to feel disoriented at that point, and she noticed that she was having problems setting the alarm on her phone. At one point, she also realized that she was having difficulty remembering how to use her scanner. And yet, since drowsiness is also one of the symptoms of a subdural hematoma, it wasn't maybe too hard for her to chalk up her confusion to being tired or even sleep deprived. Her supervisor allowed her to clock out early, and on her way back home, Nicole recalls noticing the flashing lights in her rearview mirror. But as she's told an interviewer ever since the incident, given her state of mind at the time, her mind couldn't readily put 2 and 2 together in terms of realizing those lights she was seeing belonged to a cop car. And starting to wrap everything up here, showing the Mount Pleasant traffic stop video was to show that, look, here's proof that a person doesn't need to have any special medical training to be able to discern a situation that looks like a person could need medical help. I like to think that I'm a pretty reasonable person, and I wouldn't expect Trooper Barnes to know that this lady's problem was medical, given all the information he had. But the problem is that he closed himself off from finding out more information right about immediately. Like I've mentioned, I get that the trooper's gut reaction might have been to suspect alcohol. It's likely the first thing that everyone's mind goes to. And as a matter of fact, there's even a research paper published on PubMed Central whose entire focus centers around, quote, intracranial hemorrhage mimicking alcohol intoxication, end quote. But the bottom line is that he wasn't allowing himself to gather any more information. No sobriety tests, no breathalyzer, and no formal questioning either. He deliberately skips an entire page of medical questions, many of which, had he asked and then paid attention to the answer, he may have been clued in on the notion that this woman may need to be evaluated. The accident alone should have prompted him to seek an evaluation. When he took her to have her blood drawn, he should have been forthcoming with the hospital staff. Yet again, a missed opportunity to help, maybe play a role in saving a person's life instead of the opposite. In theory, police should be able to tell the difference between a person under the influence of something and a person who's having a psychiatric or neurological issue. But unfortunately, this seems to be more of a theoretical goal. A little bit of looking into this on my part led me to the conclusion that counties employing crisis intervention team programs, or CITs for short, have reported greater success rates in identifying the difference between being on something and having a brain bleed, brain tumor, etc., but that it still continues to be a problem. This doesn't mean I'm letting Trooper Barnes off the hook. To me, the video starts with Barnes coming in angry with his feathers all seriously ruffled in a manner of speaking. We really don't know why, but to me he's coming into this in a seriously heightened emotional state. To me it appears as if Barnes' emotions, his anger, his fear, or whatever, may have worked to heavily impair his own judgment. How hard would it have been for him to administer a field sobriety test? Not that she would have passed, unfortunately, due to her brain bleed, but the fact he didn't conduct one, the fact he left out that whole entire page of questions, which are there for a reason, and it's not so that a police officer can just cross them all out. All of these things that he failed to do are just another missed opportunity to be able to decipher between a brain condition and actually being under the influence. A police officer should always be encouraged, as much as possible, to remember that it doesn't always come down to a choice between alcohol, meth, heroin, and in Barnes's warped case, lithium. I think that some law enforcement officials often forget this. The possibility of mental illness or any kind of neurological impairment needs to be placed higher on their radar somehow. And this should be concurrent with the knowledge that peace officers should defer to medical professionals or if there's a question mark as to any scenario in which someone's health could potentially be on the line. With that said, guys, this lawsuit is still relatively new. It was, like I mentioned, filed on February 1st of 2024. Sometimes we hear more developments after filing like this one, and other times the case kind of seems to just disappear. So I'll be following the story as much as I can and keep everyone updated if there should be any major sort of development, or of course just basically if there should be any mention of how all of this turns out. It's probably pretty clear by now that I'm not the biggest fan of Trooper Barnes, and I am, of course, of the hope that Ms. McClure's lawsuit will prevail. And beyond that, here's also wishing her the best. I seriously hope that she still continues to get better. Brain injuries can seriously be very difficult, but even after 2 years, I still wouldn't tell her to give up. Sometimes our brains can be really amazing when it comes to healing, and we just need to stay persistent and keep pushing ourselves and give it time. And that's going to be all for this installment. There's nothing weak or uncool about showing another person compassion. If anything, it's much hotter than anything Trooper Barnes was able to demonstrate for us today. So with that said, stay safe. I look forward to seeing you for the next video. Bye for now.